On August 3rd, 2019, my mother died. The week before, she was not doing so well, and she was a month shy of reaching her 90th birthday. So I was staying at our summer home, or vacation home, I should say, in Canaan, New York, at the time expecting visitors for the weekend. And I get a call from my brother, who had taken my mother to the emergency room and said, I don't think she's doing very well. And so I said, okay, I need to fly down to Florida where she lived. She had just moved to an assisted living in Florida. And I flew from Albany Airport, flew down to Florida, and met both my brothers there. So I get down to Florida, and I go in to see my mother, and she's intubated because she's having trouble breathing. Now let's remember that August 2019, this is before the pandemic, before everyone was intubated, and I could be with her, and my brothers could be with her. So very grateful for that. Didn't know how grateful until obviously 2020 hit. So I'm with my mom, and she sees me, and she's intubated, and she's looking at me like, what happened? You know, I mean, she couldn't speak, obviously, when you're intubated. Obviously, I'd never seen anybody intubated before, but she couldn't speak, and she's looking at me, and I say, Mom, it's okay. You didn't have a stroke, you didn't have a heart attack, we're here, trying to figure out what the problem is. So, we find out that she has pneumonia. And she's still intubated. And over the next several days, I'm with my brothers, and we're talking to her, we're trying to, you know, sometimes she's asleep, sometimes she's on meds that make her not with it at all, and sometimes she is awake. And you know, my mother was the closest person to me in my life, other than my husband and my children. But you know, we spoke all the time. She was a talker, she was a reactor, she knew every part of my life. And so when we would speak, you know, it was so weird to be with her and she can't speak. But she could, at times, hold a pen and write. So that was helpful. Not that she had a lot of strength to write, but she could. And she wrote to me, so I finally read what she, I don't know, it's like the third or fourth day where she's intubated. And we're looking at her, and we give her the pen, and she's trying to write. And what does she write? Relax. Which is so my mother. She said, she wrote, I love you all. So, you know, all of us want that to be your last, you know, conversation where, you know, you could profess your love for each other, and here she couldn't speak, but you were, I love you all. And then she, don't do this again. I don't want to do this again. I'm tired. So we sort of knew that if she was ever extubated and needed to be intubated again, that wasn't going to happen. She didn't want to do that again. And we understood. So we sat with her, and we held her hand, and we watched her sleep, and probably by the seventh day, you know, because I kept saying to the doctors, what do we do? How long does this last? How long do we wait? And my brother's a doctor too, so he was with us. And we find out on the seventh day that her fever, she spiked a fever, and she's not doing better. And this pneumonia is not going away. And so we extubated her. And it took about, I don't know, maybe 15 15 minutes before her heart officially stopped. But we all, again, were by her bed and held her hands. Again, it still makes me think of the pandemic where all these people were alone, which just blows my mind. And how grateful and fortunate I am that we got to be with her. And we said our goodbyes, and we really had gotten to say what we needed to say. So she dies on August 3rd. She died. And we had the funeral, and, surrounded by people that loved us and were there, and we had the funeral, and my kids were all there, and she was such a beloved grandmother. So, it was a deep loss, a deep, deep loss for everyone, and of course, especially me. We flew home, and we flew back to New Jersey, and after a week in New Jersey, we said, let's go back up to the Berkshires, right? The Berkshires is beautiful, and it's tranquil, and it's filled with nature. It's not so beautiful today, but it's typically really beautiful, right? And it's, and we said, how about if we go for a hike? Let's go up Monument Mountain, okay? So Monument Mountain is a hike we've taken before. It's not a really difficult hike, but one we've known. And then afterwards, there I am. As you can see, we are on the top of Monument Mountain. We made it to the top. Please note, I am wearing my hiking shoes. I am wearing my Osprey backpack. I am in hiking gear. And if you can see over there, that's Monument Mountain High School. And after the hike, we were going to go to the craft show, which was at Monument Mountain High School. And after the craft show, we were going to go to a play. Because what are the Berkshires about? It's about nature, it's about culture and art and theater and music and all those things. So that was the plan for the day. What a perfect way to really recover and absorb the loss of my mother and just feel a little bit better. Days later, I see Rick, and I know I'm in a hospital. And I thought, am I with my mother?
No, Paula. Your mother died a week ago.
And I thought, that's right, I remember. She did die. Well, where am I?
You're in Albany Medical Center.
Albany Medical Center is where I was born. I have not been there in close to 60 years. And I said, why am I at Albany Medical Center?
You fell off Monument Mountain.
Sorry for laughing.
It's okay. And not only did I fall off Monument Mountain, I fell 75 feet off Monument Mountain.
Oh my God.
And I found out I broke my clavicle. I broke 10 ribs. I broke my tibia and my fibula, the scar. And why do I remember nothing? I had a pretty bad concussion. Oh, yeah. That's the break. So, what I also don't remember, because as I said, I don't know that I've done any of these things other than looking at my body and seeing a lot of bandages. I had surgery 2 days before, after they realized I was going to live, and to put a titanium rod in my leg to repair my tibia and my fibula. Did they do an amazing job? Yeah. So, I'm really trying to take all of this in, aside from the fact my mother died just a week before. Then I say, well, who found me? And I find out that this 18-year-old boy, Henry, I call him my hero, Henry. Henry was up on the mountain with his mom. He has hiked this mountain many times. And he told his mom he's going to find me. And he did, which is amazing. So I say to Rick, I need to call him to thank him. Saved my life, right? Who is this Henry? I need to call him. So Rick gives me his number, because he had his number, and I called him, and Henry is delighted to hear from me. First of all, he's delighted I'm alive. He's delighted that I'm speaking and coherent. And so I had that phone call with him, and then another phone call with him, because I sort of needed to ask a whole lot more questions about what exactly happened when I was on this mountain. And he tells me that he finds me kneeling on the edge of a cliff, and he's only worried that I'm going to keep going because I'm that sort of unstable, and he hears me moaning. Again, I remember nothing. He hears me moaning, and he comes to find me, and he sits with me. And there's another guy, Simon, who I've never found Simon. I don't know Simon's last name. I know he lives in Boston and he's British. That's all I know about Simon. But Simon was there too. And they held my hands for 5 hours on that mountain. And they asked me lots of questions to keep me awake. And they asked me things like, where do you live? What do you do for a living? Do you have any children? What are their names? You know, all these kinds of questions. And what amazes me is when I asked him, what did I say? I got all the answers right. You know, like, yeah.
Okay. It's an old building, folks.
Thank you.
Okay, anyway, so that does sound like a bit of a foreshadowing. Anyway, so he said to me that he's with me, and although I'm moaning, he said the only time I screamed was apparently that he also had to call to let the rescuers, the EMTs, know where I was. I don't know how that works. On your phone, Bing, I don't know. Whatever it was, they were able to find me based on him calling to tell them. And he said they came and they injected something in my leg, maybe to prevent infection, whatever it was, that's when I started screaming. But they held my hand. And I remember nothing, thankfully. Okay, so I was screaming. They eventually, I hear, they hoisted me up and rescued me, and I helicoptered to Albany Medical Center. So again, I'm just so thrilled with Henry. So anyway.
Paula, what are the pictures we're looking at? Oh, we just kept checking.
Okay.
That's right.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's right. Thank you for alerting me.
Those are your legs.
So this is, I think that's my knee, and I think that's my arm.
Okay.
Oh, the other thing that they had to do, he told me, was the rescuers tied me to a tree to keep me from falling further. Who would think to do that? I guess if you're an EMT, you know these things. Anyway, so there you go. So I'm talking to Henry, and I look around in my hospital room, and I see tons of flowers and plants and things that people have sent me. And I also see that, I hear that I've had all these visitors come see me. I don't remember this. And then my family, who are all there. As you can see, I have 3 sons, and this is now my son's wife, and she wasn't his wife at the time, and my other son and his ex-girlfriend, and then there's my sister-in-law, my brother Gary, and my brother Gary's a neurologist. So, and he has a house that's like about an hour and a half away, and so he was able to check out my concussion, x-rays, scans, which is very useful, and my son and my niece and my other son. All right. Anyway, so all these people here, and if you notice, there was tons of food on this tray. I think I spent the whole week not eating. I guess when you fall off a mountain and you break 13 bones and have a concussion, it just doesn't stir up an appetite. However, the other issue was I really had to eat. Like, I was not eating. And I think my brother had to threaten me. Like, said, look, they're going to put a tube in if you don't eat. So I must have eaten something. Anyway, but yeah, you could see all this food and nothing was appealing at the time. So yeah, so there was all my family. And I thought to myself, where's my mother? You know, like, she lost her life. I almost lost my life. She doesn't know. Does she know? Did she rescue? You know, all those thoughts is, where's my mom? And I can't believe she's not here. She doesn't know. So I spent a good 10 days in the hospital, which is a very long time. And from there I had to go to rehab because I couldn't really move. I couldn't use crutches because I broke all my ribs, and I couldn't walk. I couldn't do much of anything, so I had to go to rehab. And I wound up going to Kessler. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of Kessler, but it's where Christopher Reeve went. It's where Tracy Morgan went. It's a pretty famous, well-respected rehab. And Rick drives me to rehab, and I get there, and I say, I don't want to stay here. I had been 10 days in the hospital. I get to this room with 2 roommates who've had strokes. I mean, I just didn't want to be there. And I knew I needed a lot of physical therapy, that I knew. But I just didn't want to stay. I didn't want to be in a hospital anymore. And so I had to take this cognitive test, which apparently I passed with flying colors. They're like, gee, we've never had anybody do this well. And I said, because I didn't have a stroke, I broke all these bones, I'm broken, I need to be fixed, I need to go home, I need to get physical therapy, and I'm out of here. And I left. You took me home. And I get home, and when I get home, we have a hospital bed set up. I'm in a wheelchair. From that time, I had to go from a wheelchair to a walker, to a cane, and I'm a pretty active person. I mean, I work out practically daily. I also tap dance, and I play tennis, and I go to the gym all the time. So I'm a really active person, and I was really eager to get back to that level. I really wanted that to happen. In the meantime, all these people are calling me and visiting me and really seeing me as a walking miracle. Not walking great at the time, but that I was getting there, that I was going to, I think nobody really could believe I lived. And I think I was starting to understand that. So there were two things I wanted to have happen. One was I really wanted Henry to really be rewarded for putting himself in danger to find me and sit with me. I wanted him to be recognized for that. So I found out about an article that was in the New York Times that discusses the Carnegie Hero Foundation. And actually just this year it was on 60 Minutes. And these are people who win these awards who are people that are just like you and me, not doctors, not nurses, not firemen, not EMTs. I mean, maybe some of you do that, but for the most part, regular people out there that risk their lives. And this is an amazing organization, so I quickly fill out this form and thinking he is a shoo-in for this award. And sure enough, they call me and they say, this story is worthy of investigating, but we can take about a year to investigate each case. They go to the hospital records, they go to the fire chief, they go to all these people to find out exactly what happened before they give this award. So of course, he wins. Now I know he's not the only person to win, but it's such a small number of people to win. And I said to him, and you have to remember, by now the pandemic is at full blast at this point. And I said to Henry, if you win this award, I will go up with you and your family and my family back up that mountain to give you that award. Because he said he's so humble, and I hadn't met him, even though I had met him, but I don't remember meeting him. So he had said, no, you could just, because they said, do you want it mailed to you? Because it was the pandemic. And he goes, yeah, you could just mail it. I'm like, no, we're going back up that mountain. Which we did. There's my Henry. He was so sweet and so cute. So of course we went up the mountain. Oh wait, if you go back, can you show Henry again? Notice Henry is wearing sneakers. I said, Henry, where are your hiking shoes? He goes, I never wear hiking shoes. He rescued me in sneakers. I, of course, was wearing my hiking shoes. Didn't do me a lot of good. So anyway, there's Henry, and there's the Carnegie Medal. The other thing about the Carnegie Hero Foundation is they don't just give you the medal, they give a very nice cash award, and they take care of you kind of for the rest of your life with whatever your needs might be. They paid for his college education. And he graduates this weekend. Because of course, I asked him to come tonight. I said, I'm graduating college. Pretty amazing. So that's my Henry. So the other people that I really wanted to thank was I did want to thank this fire department. I had heard there was like every fire squad, rescue squad in the Berkshire area was at the mountain, but my rescue was pioneered by Chief Charlie Berger, Fire Chief Charlie Berger from Great Barrington. There he is. And I went to visit him because, again, I wanted to thank him. And you know, if you think about it, when do they really ever get thanked? I mean, for falling off a mountain, most people are dead. So they don't really get to do much thanking, okay? We brought him cookies. And so there was Chief Berger. And he showed me, I wanted to see like what happened, because I remember nothing. And so he shows me the crate. They pull you, so apparently they had to rappel down this mountain, and they pull you up in one of those baskets. He showed me the basket, pretty amazing, that they picked me up in, and showed me where they, took me, and the truck they took me in and the ambulance and the whole thing. So I got to thank him, and he's no longer the fire chief. He had a good long run. But we cannot take enough time to thank our first responders, because we ever use the word first responder? When I fell off this mountain, nobody knew that term. Now we all know the term first responders. But I had many first responders. I'm just so grateful and so lucky.
You are super lucky.
You don't need to tell me, that's
You
true.
are super lucky.
Super lucky. And really, people like for that whole year, and still go, like how, somebody saw me dancing at a wedding and went, aren't you the one who broke all these bones? And I went, yes, and I healed. So, which is amazing. I know. Look, I've had a lot of crap happen in my life. All right? We've all had crap happen in our life, but I've had a lot. Okay, I started out with having a zillion miscarriages, going through infertility, pursuing adoption, giving birth also, but having some tremendous difficulties in child rearing that all of us have maybe experienced. I've also had breast cancer. And, breast cancer, that's something where you could die too. Got through that. But ask me if I know anyone else who has fallen off a mountain. I mean, there are support groups for all of the things I've mentioned, but falling off a mountain, I don't know anybody. Just me. And living. Let's all remember, falling off a mountain and living. And in pretty good shape. So yes, again, incredibly grateful. But as you know, I really do remember so little. That was during the pandemic, before you decided to cut your hair. Very long. Anyway, so here we are. Because I remember so little, Rick,
Paula.
don't hit your head. Any injuries. There are 4 days I can't remember.
So the weird thing is, it's not really a mountain. Which is not to say it's not high. It is high. It's just not a mountain. To be a mountain, officially, you have to be 2,000 feet above the ground. Monument Mountain is only 1,642 feet high. Still pretty high, about 200 feet higher than the Empire State Building. But, for what it's worth, it's not a mountain. Anyway, it was a beautiful day. Beautiful August day. The sky was picture clear and blue. The hills were 100 shades of green. Paula and I hiked to the top. It's not far, only about a mile and a half. We get to the top and we take a few pictures and we send them back to our kids because we had made that hike a couple of years before with them. So we thought they might like a few pictures. They were in New Jersey and I have one son back in Georgia. There were maybe a dozen people on the mountain, and they were doing the same thing we were doing. Hanging out, taking pictures, looking at the valley below, never once thinking this was a dangerous place to be. We hung out for, 10 or 15 minutes, and then we decided, we've seen it, let's go back down. Now, if you've never been on Monument Mountain, the top consists of these huge granite boulders. And people like to climb up there to be with their kids, and they take their dogs, and they take pictures, and they hang out. It all seems very safe, and like I said, there is this incredible view of the Housatonic Valley below you. To get back down, you can walk back over all those rocks and all those people and those dogs and kids, or you can walk along the perimeter of the peak. There's a very narrow path along the perimeter that leads to the main trail back to the parking lot. It's not very wide, maybe a foot wide. We decided to avoid the people and to take the path along the perimeter. We hadn't walked very far. I would say 25 feet at the most. I was ahead and Paula was a few steps behind me. I remember at one point, there was like a branch or a root or something on the ground. And I remember thinking it was sticking up an inch or two, and I remember thinking, that doesn't seem very safe. And I don't know why, but I just kept walking. And then for some reason, and again, I don't know why, I just turned around, just like that. And that's when I noticed Paula was gone. At first I thought, where could she be? You know, I didn't make much of it. It didn't even register with me. So I called out her name. I said, Paula, you know, where are you? Not in a panic, but just very, very naturally. Until I finally realized the only thing that could have happened. And then I did what I think any person in my situation would have done. I stood on the edge of the mountain, 1,642 feet above the earth, above the ground, and I saw a little spot where I think she might have fallen, where there was some dirt that it looked like it had fallen over the edge, and I began screaming out her name, Paula! 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 Nothing. Not even an echo. I crawled to the edge on my hands and my knees, and I looked around. I looked for a sign where she might be, a branch out of place, or a piece of clothing, or even a shoe, but I couldn't see a thing. There was nothing but trees and bushes and overgrowth, and it was all so green, and all I could do was scream. I said, Paula! Paula! And then I started hearing some things. One person said, I think someone fell off the mountain. And then I heard someone else say, I'm calling 911. And I kept doing, all I kept doing was trying to figure out what could I do? What kind of husband was I if I did nothing? Paula! Nothing. There was a tree 4 or 5 feet off the edge of the mountain. And I thought, I can do this. I can jump to that tree. I can climb my way down. And when I get to the bottom, somewhere down there, I'll find her. That makes sense, right? Of course, if I missed the tree, that wouldn't be good. If she was dead and I was dead, that would just suck. But these are the things you think of when you have nothing to fall back on. When you realize that all of your life experiences, everything you have done up to this point in time in your life is completely meaningless. Suddenly, you are confronted with these horrible thoughts. You want to control your brain, but your brain is running amok. It's out of control. Death. Death, of course, is the first thing that comes to mind. But you have to push that aside. It's too much. She can't be dead. It's just too overwhelming. You have to assume she's not dead. She didn't fall off Everest after all. She fell off Monument Mountain. And it's not even a mountain. Your mind is not thinking logically. Okay, she's not dead. But what if it's worse? What if she is alive and horribly injured or brain damaged and needs to be taken care of for the rest of her life? That would be awful. It's almost worse. And would you believe that just a week before, she got turned down for long-term health care? And I get it. I mean, maybe that's just where my mind went, but I had this horrible, horrible thought. What if she was disabled or brain damaged or both? That would be so expensive. I couldn't afford that kind of care. I'd be wiped out. I'd have to sell the house. The kids would get absolutely nothing. It was a selfish thought. It was a terrible thought. But in a situation where you can't act, where you can only think, your thoughts just go everywhere. I really don't know how long I stayed on the top. When I realized that jumping to the tree was a bad idea, I thought maybe I could climb my way down to her. So I began to do that, even though there were lots of people around me saying, don't do it, that's very dangerous. They begged me, don't do it. And I was like, well, I don't have a choice. So I started to climb down, but they were right. It was a really bad idea. I probably went no more than 10 feet before I realized how dangerous it was. It was very slippery, just straight up and down, and there was really nothing to grab on there. So slowly, I clawed my way back up to the top of the mountain. I did what I could do, and I continued to call her name, Paula! Nothing. I can't imagine how I looked. I'm really glad I didn't have a mirror at the time. At one point, a woman approached me, and she said, you have to take care of yourself. You could go into shock. And I thought, this woman doesn't know me. This woman doesn't know the shit I've been through in my life, the nightmares I live. Go into shock. Are you out of your fucking mind? I looked at that woman straight in her eye and I pointed my finger at her and I said with absolute conviction, I am not going into shock. And weirdly enough, it was that moment that helped me gather my thoughts. I knew there would be a rescue team coming. I knew that there was probably a team at the base of the mountain putting things together, getting ready to come up. I wasn't doing any good, just hanging out at the top of the mountain, doing nothing, calling out her name. So I went up to this guy, this stranger, and I said, can you come here, man? I said, this is where I think she was when she fell. I said, would you just do me a favor and stay here until the rescue team arrived, and then you can tell them that this is the spot where she was when she fell. And he said yes, and I took off. I got bat out of hell. I started running down that mountain. I was about 2/3 of the way down the mountain when a woman saw me running and called out to me. It was Henry's mother. I didn't know it at the time. She says to me, my son found your wife. I froze in my footsteps, and I said the only thing that I could think of, is she alive? And she said yes, and I just kept on running. A few minutes later, I'm in the parking lot where the hike began. The lot is filled, but not with cars of people who came to Monument Mountain to go for a hike on a beautiful day. There is every fire truck, every police car, every ambulance from, I don't know, a 25, 35 mile radius. They are all there in that parking lot, just there to rescue Paula. I walked into the fray to identify myself to someone, and the next thing I remember, a police officer is interviewing me. Now, I know this guy was just gathering information, but I thought, I could be a suspect. I could be that guy. He's asking me questions, but he's wondering, is this the type of person that would push his wife off a mountain? Ooh. When the interview was over, another police officer was assigned to be with me. You know, just in case. It's crazy, right? I didn't need to be watched. Go rescue my freaking wife. In the middle of all these cars and trucks is the command center. Now I know they had a job to do, and I certainly wanted them to do their job, but I needed information. I wanted to be right there with them in the thick of things. No one had yet to go up the mountain yet, not the EMTs, who would be the first to leave, not the rescue team, who wouldn't leave for much later, like 2 hours later. And by the way, the whole rescue from the time she fell to the time she got out of there took over 5 hours. Once it was determined how the rescue would take place, that's when the rescue team would go up. But they couldn't make that determination until the EMTs got to her and they knew the exact spot that she was in. I asked a lot of questions, and they were politely answered. I kept asking questions, and then they politely asked me to go away. But don't go too far. Not that I could with an escort. And then I thought, I have to tell my boys. I have 3 of them, all adults, Ethan, Elijah, and Gabe. What do I tell them when I knew so little? Should I wait, or should I call them right away? So after I told my story to the police, and after I was shooed away, yet again, from the command center, I called the kids. Obviously, I called to let them know that Paula was in a very serious accident. But the real motivation wasn't just to form them. The real motivation, if I'm being honest with myself, was that I didn't want to have to wait and tell them over the phone that their mother was dead. If I had to do that, I wanted to do it in person. So I called my boys and I told them what happened. My youngest 2, Ethan and Elijah, were in New Jersey. And I think when I told them, they were in a little bit of shock. There really wasn't a lot I could say. I just said that, your mom has been in a serious accident and you need to get up here as soon as you can, which they did. My oldest son, Gabriel, was in Georgia. When I told him, he just fell apart. He kept saying, "What do you mean? What do you mean?" As if it were more complicated than understanding that his mother had fallen off a mountain and was seriously injured. Finally, I got his girlfriend on the phone and I said, "Look," I said, "just get a flight, doesn't matter what it costs, just get a flight and get up here as fast as you can," which they did. Back at the command center, it's hard to tell what was going on, especially because the closer I got, the more they pushed me away. The EMTs had left and soon they would be with Paula, so that was a good thing. Meanwhile, I just wandered through the parking lot, not really sure what to do with myself. At one point, after the EMTs got to her, and I was standing near the command center, I heard an EMT over the walkie-talkie say, "What's your ETA?" I didn't hear the answer, but what I heard next really shook me. "Her pulse is weakening. You need to hurry." And that's when I became religious. I said the Shema, which is the Jewish prayer that affirms our commitment to God. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Le'olam V'Oed. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is God, the Lord is one. Praise be God's name forever and ever. It's the same prayer I used to say to my children when we put them to bed. Couldn't hurt, right? Eventually, the rescue team left. They hiked to the top of the mountain. They rappelled down to Paula, who had fallen, as she said, 75 feet. They put her in a basket. You saw the basket. They pulled her to the top, and they carried her halfway down the mountain to where they were met with a flatbed truck, a small flatbed truck that drove her down to the parking lot, that put her in an ambulance, that took her to the helicopter in the field in the high school across the street that would take us to the hospital.
Rick, if you move to the right, you okay, that's fine.
There it is.
There's the helicopter. Thank you. It's a 20-minute ride from Great Barrington to Albany Medical Center. It was me, Paula, the EMT, and the pilot. The EMT is with Paula, watching her vitals, and I'm sitting next to the pilot. And all of a sudden, he starts chatting me up. So you would think he would ask me, what happened to your wife? How is she? How are you? How are you doing? But instead, he decides to give me an aerial narrated tour of the Berkshires, pointing out some of the more interesting sights along the way. A beautiful mansion, incredible gardens. At one point, he points out a cornfield where somebody has carved a gigantic peace sign. I mean, it was interesting, but I was like, My wife back here, she could be dying. And he was like, look at the size of that swimming pool. It's huge. It was just weird. One more weird thing in an already weird day. The helicopter landed at Albany Medical Center, and honestly, as you can all imagine, it was like being in an episode of ER or Grey's Anatomy or any of those TV medical shows. At this point, I was pretty sure that Paula wasn't going to die, but maybe the TV audience didn't know that. She still had a major concussion and a compound fracture. I knew the broken bones could be fixed, but brain injuries are tricky. They're very serious. When we landed, I was just thrilled to see Paula's brother Gary, my sister-in-law Wendy, our niece Judith. As Paul mentioned, they had a second home in Hudson Valley, and I called him a few hours earlier because Gary was a neurologist. And I knew that doctors talk to doctors a little differently than they do to patients or family members, so it was great that he could be there. Paula had a hole in her leg where the bone had broken through the skin. And that was actually the first thing they took care of. Not repairing the broken bone, but pouring saline solution over and over for like a half hour or more into the wound to prevent it from becoming infected. Infection is the big worry, and thank God they did everything they could to prevent infection, and she never did get a leg infection, thankfully. So finally, she gets the CAT scan of her brain, and the doctor finds me to give me the results. I am petrified. My amazing wife, my partner for 35 years, the mother of my kids, this talented, vivacious woman, could be lost to me forever. I don't give the doctor a second. I blurted out, will she recover? Right away. And he looks at me and he says, yes. That's great. So I said, how long will it take? A day? A week? A month? And he looked at me with those medical school trained empathic eyes and he said, yes. My brother-in-law also looked at the CAT scan and he agreed. There was some bleeding on the brain, but not enough that required surgery. Paula would recover eventually. It would be 2 days before they could operate on Paula's leg. They needed to wait until the swelling went down on her brain. During that time, they checked on her a lot. During one examination, when she was really kind of out of it, the doctor takes his hand and he presses down on Paula's arm. He said, what am I touching? And Paula would respond, and she said,
That's my leg.
next, the doctor takes his hand and he puts it on Paula's leg and he says to her, what am I touching? And she says,
That's my arm.
this goes on for quite a while, each time Paula reversing her appendages. Finally, one last time, the doctor takes his hand and he puts it on her leg one more time and he says, what am I touching? And Paula said,
That's my alarm.
2 days later, the swelling on the brain had gone down, and the doctors were able to perform the surgery to repair the leg, which included, as she told you, putting a titanium rod there for extra support. By now, all the kids had arrived, and so during surgery, we were all instructed to go into a family waiting room where we could just kind of hang out together while the surgery was going on. At this point, no one seemed to think that Paula's life was in any danger. We would just wait for the leg to be repaired, and so we waited. And we waited. And we looked at the screen on the wall that had her name that would eventually inform us when the surgery was over. But her name stayed and the surgery just kept going. It seemed to be taking longer than we thought, and it was well past dinner time. I could tell the kids would prefer to be someplace else, and you know, honestly, I was ready for a little alone time. So I gave them my credit card. I said, go out and have a nice dinner, and they all left for dinner. I was alone. There was no one else in the room. It was very quiet. And that's when it happened. The weirdest thing ever. I was sitting on the sofa, looking at my phone, and suddenly, I mean like a flash, as fast as I could, I turned around. Because I knew there was someone else there. But when I turned around, just like on the mountain, there was no one. But I swear to you, I felt it. I knew it as much as I knew anything, if only for an instant, that there was someone in the room with me. At first I thought, oh my God, it's Paula. She died in surgery and stopped on her way by to see me wherever she was going. I mean, why was the surgery taking so long? They said it would take 2 hours and it was already 4. And then I thought, be rational. Paula's not going to die from an operation on her leg. It was her mother. Her mother who died the week before, stopping by just to check in and tell me everything would be okay. After all, she knew the neighborhood. She grew up in Albany. She gave birth to all 3 of her children in that very same hospital. So it kind of made sense. And, I never believed in this stuff, ever. It was just, another weird thing. Eventually, Paula got out of surgery and everything was fine. For the second night in a row, I stayed in her room and I slept on a chair beside her bed. Now, I don't know if you've ever been in an ICU room, but I'd say there's one truly distinguishing feature about an ICU room, and that is an overabundance of bells. Now, I'm not talking church bells here. I'm talking the blood pressure bell, the oxygen bell, the breathing bell, the I gotta pee bell. They're going on and on and on. It's a long list of dings and dongs, and they're going on constantly. They never stop. They are also, as far as I could tell, completely ignored by the doctors and the nurses. So Paula's asleep. It's 3 a.m. and I hear the bells going off. Not just one at a time, but all of them simultaneously. And so, of course, I think it's weird, right? But what was weirder was that when I opened my eyes, standing before me, completely naked, covered in blood, all of her IVs removed, standing there on her new titanium leg, was Paula. It was like a scene out of Carrie. And you will be happy to know I did not go into shock. I calmly walked out of the room and I yelled for help, which of course came quickly because you're not supposed to yell for help in the ICU at 3 o'clock in the morning. The nurses arrived. They gently cleaned Paula up, put her gown back on, and put her back into the bed, and the bells kept ringing. The good news is that after 4 or 5 days, Paula was pretty much back to us mentally. Although up until that point, she was a little different. First of all, after the accident, at least for the first few days, she looked exactly like her 90-year-old mother, who, as we all know, died the week before. That wasn't even the scary part. The scary part was that she spoke and sounded like my mother, who was not dead, but who was suffering from Alzheimer's disease. That was frightening. Neither of these things, however, was as disturbing as what I learned when it was time to find a rehab for Paula and get her out of the hospital. She had been there almost a week. She was eating again, she was chatty, she was talking on the phone. Cognitively, she was great. She was 98% back, 99% back. She didn't sound like my mother anymore, and she stopped looking like her mother. Then, for some strange reason, a social worker pulls me aside. She says, I have to talk to you in private. Okay. She said, we're having a hard time getting Paula into rehab. The rehab wants to know if she's still an IV drug user. I said, excuse me? She said, she doesn't still have a drug problem, does she? I said, she never had a drug problem. She said, that's not what the records say. Paula's drug problem, she didn't have one, never had one. I think in college she took a hit off a joint and got a headache. But it kept her in the hospital an extra 2 or 3 days until we could convince the people at the Kessler Institute, where, as we know, she stayed for all of one night, that Paula was clean. It's weird. The good news, as you can see, is that her indomitable spirit pulled her through. Despite a broken leg, a very serious concussion, 10 broken ribs, a broken collarbone, she was never unconscious from the fall. Her incredible spirit, which has weathered more than its share of tragedy, showed again the inner courage that she always possessed. I wrote about my adventure in a letter to Paula that was published in the Berkshire Eagle. This is how the letter ended. I will be there when you fall. I will be there when you rise. I will hold your hand again and tell you I love you. And many years from now, when we fly away together, I will cradle you in my arms through the light of the Milky Way, the gentle hand of God taking us home.